just to make sure that that's still the case in the dictionary. The Merriam-Webster dictionary now puts a hyphen in between the two words, and I guess that's okay. That's their decision. We don't place the hyphen, or we put it in just one word, because it is literally the translation of one word, the ancient Sanskrit word metta, M-E-T-T-A, metta. Metta means loving kindness. And it also refers to the meditative practices that are related to it, that are based on it, and that we see used more and more in various forms. I was looking at a YouTube video yesterday where a Christian pastor was doing loving kindness meditation in their church as well. It's not just Buddhists and Unitarian Universalists. It's spreading as a practice. Yeah, loving kindness, what is it? Well, we know what it is. Probably it's something we give. We extend loving kindness. It's a benevolence, goodwill, compassion. And we are so often reminded, rightly so, that it is better to give than to receive. In the Bible, we see words to that effect. And that Bible really influences our culture. We find it attributed to words that Jesus spoke in the book of Acts, chapter 20, verse 35, where Jesus is addressing the elders in the city of Ephesus. And over time, this proverb, it is better to give than to receive, has become deeply embedded in our culture. And it is often expressed even by people unfamiliar with its biblical source. Giving leaves us with a great feeling, one that is much greater than receiving. And in some cultures, receiving is even seen as a negative characteristic and giving as a better characteristic. It's not just in Western cultures, it's in cultures all around the world. So, not surprisingly, some people tend to be a bit puzzled when we do loving kindness meditation and we begin with ourselves. And we mentally verbalize it as, may I be free of harm, may I be well. And some people even think, may I be happy. In some versions of loving kindness meditation. So what is with all the I here, I think? Yeah, we live in a culture of ego. So is it really good in that culture to reinforce it, so to speak, by sending good things to ourselves, by self-love? To some of us, that might seem contradictory to that proverb, that it's better to give than to receive. But why can't we give to ourselves? I want to tell you a little story of how I encountered some skepticism in a real-world situation where ego was a bit on display. I was giving a talk to the inmates of a maximum security correctional facility in St. Louis. And there's a lot of ego in these facilities, among the inmates, among the guards, and also among the people who talk to them, because it takes a little bit of, gumption to go and talk to a large group of inmates who are in a level 1 maximum security correctional facility. So I came in, and for this occasion, many of the inmates were present. It was a huge auditorium that they had filled. I think it was mandatory. And here I was, I had to talk to them. And I remember distinctly what happened when I explained loving-kindness meditation to the assembled inmates in this prison. And when I said words like, "May I be well," one inmate raised his hand and said, "Is that then the same as, for example, me thinking about what I'm going to do when I get released and how I can be successful?" I couldn't just say, "No, it's not." So my first reply was something a little more cautionary, and I said, "Well, you got to start somewhere." But I realized I had to find a better way to explain that nuance between "may I be well" and "may I be successful eventually and rich." That's not the same thing. And it's because of that encounter that I started to develop this idea of the self, of thinking about the self as this small pebble that we drop in a lake, and we imagine the ripples that go out from the center of that circle. After hearing the prison inmate talk about becoming well-off and successful, I began to explain that the pebble should not be too big. It should be just lowered in the water rather carefully, with a mind that is not geared to anger or to eager anticipation for success. That would be more, I mentioned, to like dropping a rock in the water. It makes a big ploof, sinks to the bottom, and it doesn't cause much rippling outwards. There was some silence in the room when I said that. That didn't go over too well. So, yeah. But how do we even put such good intentions into practice if we want to be that little pebble and see the ripples go out? Just meditating on it may not suffice. It doesn't do any harm to meditate on these thoughts. At least we're not harming anyone. But that's probably not good enough in today's world. And there are some stories about really big, significant acts of goodwill and generosity towards others. And some of them I'm always a little suspicious of when I see them written as big stories. There are those books called Chicken Soup for the Soul, and some of them have magnificent stories, but they have so much detail that people recall from their childhood, and I'm thinking, I don't know. But they sound really good, and they're still very inspirational. I just reread one that was written by Dan Clark, who is a motivational speaker, and that story was published in Chicken Soup for the Soul. It's very interesting that lately I have seen that story attributed to Katharine Hepburn. Why is that? Well, I don't know exactly how that happened, but I see it published with her picture, and I'm reminded of the fact that she had a lot of really socialist ideas, so maybe that's how that got put together. And the story is very detailed. I'm not going to tell you all the details because it would take 20 minutes to do that. And as I said, I'm a little skeptical about its total veracity. But here's the gist of it. When Dan Clark was a teenager, he was standing in line at a circus, ready to get tickets. He was standing in line with his father. His father was going to get them tickets. And in front of them, Dan Clark describes, was a large family with 8 children. And he makes a point of describing that they were poor, but immaculately clean and well-behaved. And I thought that was a little icky to read, because it was attaching to stereotypes that I prefer not to see in stories like this, but there it was. And after describing all this, then Clark says it was their turn almost to purchase their tickets. And so he noticed that the family in front of them, the father taking out his money, and he was going to get tickets. And you can imagine what's going to happen. When they said how much it was going to be for the 8 kids and the 2 adults, he counted his money. He didn't have enough. So they were about to leave. So this is where the story turns to Dan's father, who carefully, surreptitiously takes a $20 bill out of his own billfold and kind of drops it on the ground next to the feet of the father in front of him. And he picks it up and he said, "Hey, I saw that this bill was falling out of your pocket, and I just want to give it back to you." And the rest of the story goes on, and long story short, that family got the tickets, and they got to go to the circus. But there wasn't enough money left for Dan and his father to go, so they went back home. But they still felt good. So, whether it's true or not, the story certainly is an example of how we can cultivate and extend compassion, but it takes the right kind of circumstances, and we don't encounter those every day. It would be nice if we did, and we could pick out those $20 bills and do our thing, but that usually doesn't happen. Usually, putting loving kindness in practice around us does not involve such grandiose acts. It includes a lot of little things. Making a meal for other people. Putting a few dollars in a plate collection. Helping a child with their homework. Serving in a Big Brother or Big Sister program. Actually, that's a much bigger thing in terms of time commitment. Doing dishes in the social hall downstairs. Letting another person who is with us having the better seat in the theater behind the small person while we will sit behind the tall person. And there is so much more, so many little things. And at the end of his own story, Dan Clark wrote, "If you want to be great, greater than life itself, learn to give. Love has nothing to do with what you expect to get, like in, I want someone to love me. Love has everything to do with what you expect to give. Everything." And maybe he meant expect to give everything. But let's take a look at the self-love that we started with at the beginning of our loving kindness practices. We always start with something like, "May I be well, may I be free of suffering." So what's with all this I? And we have talked about this kind of thing before in this room, I remember. What we are really doing at that part of it is to forgive ourselves for the dislike and the hatred that we so often have for ourselves. If we cannot let go of that, we may not be able to turn outward to others and give to them. So when we say, "May I be free of suffering," it's may I be free of the suffering of hating myself. May I be well as a result of that. And then I can turn to the ripple effect that goes to those around me and those in the rest of the world. Here's a story that is definitely true. It was in the papers. Well, not all the papers publish the truth these days, but this one is pretty reliable. It's been verified in many ways. And it's a conversation that was held between Sharon Salzberg, who has written many books on loving kindness meditation, she's an American, and the Dalai Lama, when they were both at a conference in Dharamsala in India in 1990, and the Dalai Lama was leading a workshop. And during that workshop, Sharon Salzberg asked the Dalai Lama about self-hatred. And he looked at her in a very puzzled way. He did not know what she was talking about. What do you mean when you say self-hatred? He said eventually. And he even asked a translator to help out with understanding that term, self-hatred. He just didn't understand the idea that one could have self-hatred. It was completely foreign to him as a Buddhist, because as a Buddhist he understood that we all seek to be content, to be happy, and to avoid suffering. So why do this to ourselves? There was an obvious cultural gap there between the culture that Sharon Salzberg came from and the one that the Dalai Lama grew up in. Self-hatred, not loving oneself, is a concept that's very familiar in Western culture. I have indulged in it quite a bit, and I'm sure many of you have too. But it's not part of the Buddhist worldview that is centered on inherent worth, on compassion. So they have a better starting point than most of us do. The Dalai Lama viewed self-hatred as something that was counter to a basic principle of self-interest. And after the workshop, he said, I really learned something here today, because he learned about these cultural differences. So loving oneself, forgiving oneself, after all, giving is part of forgiving. It's an important first step, a gift of loving kindness to oneself. And forgiving others is also a gift. It's not just a gift to them, it's a gift to oneself as well. It frees us from resentment and from continuous suffering and fretting. So may we keep in mind how much joy there is in giving. To make someone happy through acts of giving things, giving time, giving forgiveness. And that includes ourselves. And may it be so.